It is hard to believe, but this is the last video of this course. Okay. So when you're given a graph of a function, you need to be able to, or well, let's not say the graph of a function. When you're given a graph, you need to be able to determine if it is the graph of a function or not. Okay. So we have this test that we can do called the vertical line test. So the vertical line test is used to determine if a graph is a function or not. Okay. Now we know a couple of things. We know that to be a function, x's cannot repeat. So if you look at that function as a set of ordered pairs, an x cannot show up twice. We also know that vertical lines cannot be functions. And you may not know that yet. You might be like, whoa, whoa, do we know this? I'm going to tell you that yes, you do know this. You just don't know you know it yet. So vertical lines are not functions. It turns out all lines are functions except vertical lines. And vertical lines are not functions because if you look at a vertical line, pretend this is drawn. Well, let me fix that. That's really bad. Okay, let's fix this. So we have our Cartesian plane, and then let's say we have some vertical line right here. Well, what we know about vertical lines is they're of the form x equals some number. So no matter what ordered pair you pick, you're going to get the exact same x value. And all we need is an x to show up more than once. If an x shows up twice, it can't be a function. So let's take this point here and this point here. These have the same x value. So these 2 points share an x. And if we look at any other point on the graph, it's going to share that same x. So when you're dealing with a vertical line, it doesn't matter what point you look at, you're going to get the same x value. So vertical lines are not functions because all of the x coordinates are the same, which means the x is more than repeat. They repeat over and over and over and over. So we know that a vertical line is not a function. So we use that to our advantage. So what the vertical line allows us to do is this. If any vertical line intersects a graph in more than one point, the graph does not define y as a function of x. So you take a graph and you kind of have this invisible vertical line and you just kind of sweep it across your graph. If at any point that vertical line intersects your graph more than once, that tells you right there that x is repeat and you do not have a function. Okay? So looking at example 6, it says determine if each graph is that of a function. Well, if we look at the first graph, this is much easier to do in person because I'll take this fake vertical line and I'll sweep it across the graph and I'll show you that we don't intersect more than once anywhere. But just imagine a vertical line passing through graph A. If we were to go from here to here, at no point are we going to touch this blue line more than once. At most, we're going to be touching this at one point, no matter where that vertical line is. Okay, so in this case, this passes the vertical line test. I'm just going to do VLT. So this is a function. Okay, so just kind of take like the side of a sheet of paper and sweep it across this graph from left to right. And at no point is that vertical, like the side of that piece of paper, going to touch this line or this graph more than once. Okay, looking at part B, same thing. We have a line, and I've already said that vertical lines are not functions. And then verbally, I said all other lines are. We don't have it written down anywhere, but all lines are functions except for vertical lines. But here you've kind of got a graph. So again, take the side of a sheet of paper and just sweep it across this graph from left to right. And if you look at the edge of that piece of paper, at no point is it going to touch this graph more than once. So this passes the vertical line test. So this is a function. Now it only has to fail the vertical line test at one point. If at any point the graph or the vertical line touches your graph more than once, you don't have a function. So let's look at part C. Part C, hopefully you can just look at it real quick and tell me yes or no. So in this case, let's take any vertical line. Let's say we have the vertical line right here. Well, I can see that this vertical line is going to have these two x's are going to be the same x. That tells me x's repeat. Okay, so at this vertical line, it fails, and just about every other vertical line that we could draw on this graph is going to fail the vertical line test because we're going to touch the graph more than once, just about everywhere except the very, very edges of this graph. So we would say this fails the vertical line test. So this is not a function. Okay. So as far as functions go, again, we're just building a very basic foundation that will almost immediately be built upon when you get into your pre-calculus class. You're going to start talking about functions very, very quickly. Okay. You need to understand what is a function by definition. Okay, you need to understand that when you have an equation, can I write it as a function? So you need to understand function notation. You also need to understand how to evaluate a function. That's a big thing. You're going to do that quite a bit. You also need to understand, just looking at a graph, is it a function or not? Now, this is the most basic foundation on the planet. You're going to do so much more with functions. You're going to do a ton with domain and range. You're going to graph tons of different functions. You're going to look at there was a fly buzzing by. You're going to look at lots of different equations and need to know, is this a function or not? Okay, so this is just the starting point with functions. You're going to expand on this much, much more when you get into your pre-calculus class. So do be prepared for that.